Welcome to the BC Salmon Recovery and Resilience Conference. Please, take your seats. The conference is about to start. Please welcome to the stage your MC, Michael Meneer.
Hello. Oh, wow, some clapping. Thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause. It's great to be back with you all in one room. The fog's returned, so there's nothing to look at out there, so we'll just keep our attention up here for the next little bit. I know I've thoroughly enjoyed the last 2 days with the breakout sessions, 100 different speakers that we've had. And it's been wonderful to hear all the different perspectives and the questions coming from this diverse audience of people. So I hope you all had a good time during the breakouts. So you've had a chance to participate in the breakout sessions and to do some thinking and look at your experiences and the experiences of others. And so we wanted to check back in with you about that question that we posed to you yesterday, which was the magic wand question. If there was one thing that you could fix, one challenge facing salmon today, excuse me, what would your top priority be for salmon? So some of you may have given us your thoughts yesterday on Slido, but we want to hear from you now. So if you can take out Slido, and we have our event code Salmon 2024. If you could enter in that answer to that question, that magic wand question, we'd be very grateful for you to do that. We're going to have a great afternoon here, closing plenary session. We're going to be talking about people and salmon. And what's our system for working together or systems like right now? And how can we make it better? And how can we create a system transformation where we can all work better together? And most importantly, rebuild salmon and see those changes and that improvement that we know that we need for salmon. So we're going to hear from a few speakers from our partner speakers here, and then we're going to have a town hall session on this Made in BC Salmon Recovery Model that we've been developing with First Nations Fisheries Council. But to get our plenary started, we wanted to show you an example of people coming together to make a difference for salmon and amidst climate change and also advancing reconciliation at the same time. So I'm pleased to ask you to watch a great video now that's been provided to us by our friends at Fisheries and Oceans Canada.
Salmon have a really amazing life cycle. They go through so much in their life to get where they need to get just to create the next generation. To me, salmon symbolize a healthy watershed. So let's do everything we can to make their freshwater existence as great as it can be.
We've actually got two projects happening here. One is the Skahoon River.
And what was happening is the Nicola was washing out basically Skahoon Creek, so it was going to be inaccessible for the fish.
That project's being done because it's a fish-bearing stream for steelhead, coho, and chinook. And all three of these species are stocks of concern in our area. The second project that we have over here is called the High Bank. And because of the erosion that occurred in November of 21 and prior, we're losing those cultural sites, which are those pit homes. Shishkin, or a pit home, is what we used to live in prior to contact. So these pit homes, they still have artifacts within them. It's because of Truth and Reconciliation and Canada adopting UNDRIP that we've got a voice to say we need to protect these areas.
So fish haven't been able to get into Skahoon Creek, and it's a very important watershed. So really important to give them access to the habitat that they want to be in.
So we've had to haul in a lot of rock, and that's what's going to keep the river from migrating back into the high bank. Yeah, the large rock basically is what prevents the river from moving where we don't want it to go.
We plant the willows for fish habitat, plus to hold the rocks in place as they grow bigger in the roots.
So the reason for these trees embedded into our rock is to slow the water through this section so the fish have a chance to rest on their journey upstream to their spawning beds.
Each of the salmon is vital not only to the people and our sustenance, but to the ecosystem. You know, when I come down here, it's one of the most exciting projects that I've been working on, and the team that we've got has just been phenomenal.
When you think about the incredible journey that salmon and other species that are migrating from the ocean undertake on an annual basis, to have them come back to their home creek, their watershed, only to be shut down at the front door, it's just impossible not to get yourself involved in. So to see something like this happening where you're providing new access for fish back on the ground, it's very, very rewarding to see it in action.
Thank you to our friends at Fisheries and Oceans Canada for putting that video together. And I want to highlight, just out of a point of pride, that we were, PSF, you notice, were part of that project, and also the province of British Columbia, part of that project, and most importantly, Indigenous-led. And this is the example of big projects that need to happen to get fish moving amidst climate change, and we need to be doing more of them. And so that example is a great way to start this afternoon, because we're going to be talking about how can we create a system where we can free up resources and people to do more of these projects. So thank you very much for all and acknowledge any of the folks in the room who've been a part of that particular project. I'm now pleased to call up Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Has been a major partner of this conference, as you know. And we invited the Minister, Deanne Lebetoulier, to be here, but she was unable to be here because of the House government sitting. But we're very pleased that we have strong presence here from the Pacific region. Susan Chambers, the lead person here in the Pacific region, is here today. Susan, where are you? I just wanted to acknowledge you right up front here. Thank you, Susan, for all your help and support, and your team. And the minister has asked one of her senior colleagues, Kaili Levesque, who's the new Associate Deputy Minister of Fisheries, to come out. And I believe this is her first trip to the West Coast in her new role as the Associate Deputy Minister. So, Kaili, we are thrilled to have you here, and we welcome you to the stage. Kaili Levesque. Thanks. Okay.
All right. Sorry, height is not one of my strengths. So good afternoon, everyone. I feel like I should just let that video speak for itself in terms of what DFO stands for and what we are here for, and why this partnership exists with all of you as well. It's a pleasure to be here. As Mike noted, I have just recently taken on the role of Associate Deputy Minister here at Fisheries and Oceans, and I really appreciate the invitation to speak as I continue my learning journey in the fisheries files. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that while I normally join meetings with colleagues from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, I have the honor and the privilege of being on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I'm grateful to be carrying out our work here today. I truly appreciate and am increasingly learning to appreciate, as was noted, it's my first professional trip in this capacity to Vancouver, but having a lengthy relationship and family ties here as well, the the importance of Pacific salmon to First Nations and to all Canadians as a tombstone species, an identity species, as a proud symbol of the Pacific Northwest, and understanding how important salmon fisheries are to coastal communities and their economies and the small communities therein. The department's vision for Pacific salmon is to work together to conserve and restore Pacific salmon stocks and their ecosystem for those who depend on them. To this end, DFO continues to advance core programs that support recovery and resilience of the Pacific salmon. In addition to fish and fish habitat regulatory permitting programs, the department continues to support area-based salmon stock assessment, which provides important information to support annual advice for the conservation and management of salmon populations. External partners, like many of you, continue to play an increasingly and critical role in the delivery of these stock assessment activities. We can't be everywhere all at once, and our partners play a huge role in filling those gaps. Scientific research, complemented by the advisory processes, remain core to understanding how best to support sustainable fishing opportunities. The enhancement facilities up and down the coast continue to produce salmon to increase their chances of survival for conservation and harvest purposes. However, we face a significant challenge. Multiple and cumulative factors are affecting Pacific salmon at every stage of their life cycle. Climate change is having an increasingly profound effect. Despite past efforts to protect, conserve, and restore Pacific salmon, the condition of many wild Pacific salmon stocks has declined to critical level, as you all know better than I. In addition to our core work in response to the historic declines, in 2021, the Government of Canada invested $686 million over 5 years to implement decisive steps under the PSSI, the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative. And over the past 3.5 years, we've been working towards restoring vulnerable populations of Pacific salmon and their habitat, increasing sustainable fishing opportunities and reducing impacts on vulnerable stocks, and building capacity and working with partners to achieve better outcomes for Pacific salmon. DFO cannot do this alone, and our work around PSSI is centered on partnerships with Indigenous peoples, provincial, territorial governments, harvesters, steward partners, academia, environmentalists, and other stakeholders. And I've been trying to meet as many of you as I can and look forward to future, this will definitely not be my first or my last trip out here in this capacity. As of November 13th, 2024, the department has invested $254.2 million in targeted activities to address Pacific salmon declines, of which $111.3 million was actually delivered through partners. And to think about the scale and scope of those activities and the partnership that that entails is something that really deserves to be highlighted and celebrated. Looking forward, the department will continue to advance actions for Pacific salmon rebuilding, including infrastructure projects in collaboration, furthering that collaboration. And a few of the examples, if you'll indulge me for just a moment, of what we've accomplished, because without habitat, there are no fish. Under PSSI, we've worked in partnership with others to restore over 18.5 million square meters of salmon habitat. As an example, DFO's habitat restoration team worked with the Pacific Salmon Foundation and Cowichan Natural Resources to restore streamside habitat along the Dead Man River in the Thompson-Nicola, which included planting cottonwood trees for shade, in addition to the willow that were mentioned. These projects aim to not only restore degraded salmon habitat, but can also support more resilient ecosystems so that the salmon themselves can thrive. It's significant that these habitat restoration projects also create jobs and support local economies. There's a lot of good work also happening on the hatchery and enhancement side under PSSI with Indigenous partners like the Gaertner and the Cowichan. DFO is working to build new conservation-based hatcheries. We're also doing major infrastructure upgrades at 27 current facilities to boost at-risk salmon populations and investing in scientific research to better inform our enhancement programs. In addition, on National Indigenous Peoples Day, our minister joined representatives from the province of BC and the First Nations Fisheries Council in signing a new trilateral salmon accord. The accord represents a historic joint commitment to take urgent action to safeguard Pacific salmon for future generations. We also announced 73 projects funded through Phase 2 of the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, which I understand everybody calls BC SHRIP, and I know there was a great panel on it this morning. This program is a joint partnership between the Government of Canada and the province of BC and provides that much needed funding for protection and restoration activities for Pacific salmon and other priority wild fish stocks. For example, the BC Shrift is supporting work by the Pacific Salmon Foundation in collaboration with the BC Nature Foundation and First Nations to determine bottlenecks or periods of elevated mortality impacting the survival of Chinook, coho, and steelhead. This project contributes to our understanding of salmon survival throughout the life cycle and potentially help us develop more targeted recovery and resilience efforts. 3.5 years into this unprecedented effort, we are seeing tangible and meaningful results of these efforts. The outcomes we are achieving reflect collaboration and shared commitment to addressing the decline of Pacific salmon. This conference has been a huge opportunity to make connections, share knowledge, and create and exchange ideas. Thank you to all of the organizers and all of you who have shown up. You've voted with your feet. You've voted with your time and your effort to dedicate yourself to research, restoration, collaboration activities that are making a difference for Pacific salmon. And thank you for inviting me to speak, even though I'm brand new in this role. I really, really appreciate it. There's coming by position and representing the department, but I also really appreciate the relationships that I'm having time to build. And I'm learning from so many of you as I build out my fish toolkit, or the tackle box, if you will forgive my terrible fish puns. So looking forward to working with you in the future and looking forward to a really great panel. Thank you to everyone.
Kaili. I just said Kaili did get thrown into the deep end, for sure. Thank you, Kaili, new in your position. And I know our team was out in Ottawa just days into your new job, and you graciously met with them, and we're looking forward to working more with you. So coming up next, we are going to be moving into discussion about what we call the Made in BC Salmon Recovery Model. I mentioned to you yesterday that we've been working over the last 3 years with First Nations Fisheries Council on and hosted a number of smaller sessions like this called the Salmon Action Dialogues, where we've been looking at other jurisdictions, both in Canada, BC, and in the US, where people seem to be coming together, working collaboratively, raising money together, and deploying money like we saw in that big project there for the good of salmon. And you know, we know that salmon have been declining for 3 decades and longer. Many of you may know that. And that the status quo for how we work together as people isn't working. So we need a new way forward. We need a way to transform salmon management systems. And Crown governments are our partners, but we know that they can't save salmon alone. We know that we as an NGO can't do this alone. And so these historic approaches that we've taken, we have to change. And that's what this afternoon is going to be all about. And we're particularly going to be, I'm excited to be talking more about a model where First Nations and communities are leading the development of salmon recovery plans. We don't have plans, we need plans. We need to set priorities together. And where the government is a part of it, but they're not necessarily leading the parade. No offense to my government friends. But the good thing is that we've had James Mack from the province, we've had Sarah Murdoch from DFO participating in all of these salmon action dialogues, and they're in agreement that we need a new system, that we need a new model. So we see this model being one that's, as I say, highly collaborative, that balances science, traditional knowledge, and brings people together around all of these big challenges that we're facing. I've been in a couple of sessions on data, and everybody keeps saying our old systems of collecting and analyzing data, they just don't work anymore. So it's one great example of an area where we can do better together in a more collaborative system. So the Made in BC Salmon Recovery Model is a 3-scale strategy for working together towards salmon recovery, addressing climate change, and advancing all of this through Indigenous leadership. A lot's gone into this process. You're going to hear more about it. We're going to have a great facilitated discussion from a gentleman you all know well, Tom Rutherford. And the goal of the session is to share this thinking that I'm expounding on here with a broader group of salmon leaders. Some of you have been part of these discussions. Many of you have not. there's a lot of young people here, and we're so excited to have younger people. We're so excited to have the Yukon folks here. We're so excited to have our friends from the U.S. here. And so this is an opportunity for Stu and me and our organizations to share these ideas a little bit more broadly, and you to give us your feedback and your ideas. Maybe you figured it out, and we can quit stumbling along and we can get on with it. So on that note, I'm delighted to call up again to the podium here the person that's been the partner with me in this process and that we're looking to for great leadership as the new executive director of the First Nations Fisheries Council. And again, I just want to say thank you so much to you for being a partner in this conference. Thank your staff, Hannah in particular, for all the work that's gone into this. And want to make sure that we set this discussion off this afternoon in a very positive way, in a constructive way. And so Stu Barnes is here from the First Nations Fisheries Council to help us do that. Stu.
Silksa. Before I get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the youth in the room and at the conference here. I don't know what the people's definition of what a youth is, but it's certainly younger than me. And I was very encouraged to see all the youth first in our First Nations summit that we had on day one, but then again, just in general, over the past 2 days. You're really inheriting a bomb here, and the fact that you guys are here ready to step up and answer that challenge is very motivating for all of us that have been in this game and maybe been a part of creating that bomb. So I just wanted to acknowledge all you folks, all you young fish warriors in training, and probably already are fish warriors, so just want to give a round of applause to all the youth in the room. So for those of you that may not know me, my name is Stu Barnes. I carry the traditional name of Kilduck from the House of Dawamuk in the Gitxsan territory. I'm the executive director of the First Nations Fisheries Council. It's been very great to interact with folks over the past 2 days. Looking forward to continuing on those conversations. Yesterday, I spoke to you about the importance of connecting and the power of relationships. The turnout at this conference shows how important this issue is and how committed we are to work together. Today, I want to share one example of what can be accomplished through partnership and collaboration. Earlier this year, FNFC signed the Trilateral Salmon Accord with BC and Canada. Before I jump into the accord, I want to provide a bit of history of how we've arrived at this moment. Over the last several decades, through many reports, studies, inquiries, and the historic decline of BC's wild Pacific salmon populations have been well documented. In order to conserve salmon habitats and support sustainability of salmon populations, First Nations and all levels of governments need to take collaborative action. Because of the complexity and cross-jurisdictional nature of salmon, it was recognized by First Nations governments, the Government of Canada, and the Government of BC, that the trilateral approach to salmon recovery is necessary for the survival of salmon. The level of crisis requires a trilateral approach because we are stronger when we work together, and that is the only way we will have a chance at saving salmon. FNFC, DFO, and BC agreed that extinction is not an option. So urgent action was and is needed to conserve and restore wild Pacific salmon stocks and their habitat. In 2022, FNFC and PSF worked together to create the Pacific Salmon Action Dialogue series. With this series, we wanted to unite First Nations governments, Crown governments, and other stakeholders to address the drastic decline of BC's salmon populations. Our goal in uniting this group was the signing of a trilateral salmon accord, and subsequently, a larger goal of a made-in-BC model for salmon recovery. As many of you are aware, BC does not currently have one mandated by law. Through the dialogue series, we explored the Washington State salmon recovery strategy as a model that we could learn from. Earlier this year, FNFC and PSF drafted a paper on the success of the Washington model, which outlined a proposed framework for BC. On June 21st, FNFC, Canada, and BC signed the historic Trilateral Salmon Accord. This signaled a unified effort to conservation of salmon across BC and hopefully the start of a new approach to protecting this keystone species. This accord is the first of its kind in Canada and is a monumental step in building a model for wild Pacific salmon recovery in BC. We still have so much more work to do to safeguard salmon and to ensure future generations have access to salmon in nature and not in museums. So what does the future of a Trilateral Salmon Accord look like? FNFC will convene First Nations Salmon Caucus, which will serve to provide recommendations and insight to a trilateral table, with seats for First Nations commissioners and representatives from BC and DFO. We need long-term tools and agreements, like the Accord, in order to create effective policy and engagement and to ensure there is a collaboration when making decisions on how to save salmon. A Made in BC model would involve First Nations as genuine co-managers across all aspects of salmon recovery. This is a key step to truly collaborative model for BC's salmon recovery. As I previously said, there is still a lot of work to do, and FNFC is committed to do that work, as well as advancing the interests of First Nations in BC and working with BC and Canada. But the signing and the formation of the Accord marks the beginning of a concerted effort amongst First Nations, BC, Canada, towards a united goal to save wild Pacific salmon. We are all coming together to say extinction is not an option. So please join me in celebrating the significant and historic milestone. And with that, I'd just like to say Hamaya, and I really appreciate my time with all of you these last 2 days, and look forward to being invited to many of your communities as we look to recover salmon for all of our future generations. Hamaya.
No, perfect. Thank you, Stu, very much. We're just at PSF so thrilled at the opportunity that we have to work with First Nations Fisheries Council. And we signed a commitment to action a couple nights ago so that we are now, we're not a government, but we're wanting to be part of this. And so Stu and I signed a commitment to action so that FNFC and PSF have a plan for us to continue to work forward on this. We have to make those commitments in front of our friends and families and our leadership, and we did that Monday night. And I thank you for that, Stu, and all the leadership that you're showing. I'm really thrilled to introduce the next person because he really embodies the kind of leaders that I think we have here in BC and lots of communities. And Jason Hwang, my colleague, and we get to travel. We're really fortunate. We travel in BC, we go to Washington and California and Oregon, and we visit all these other salmon jurisdictions. And I'm telling you, in case you made my accent, I'm from the States originally, been here a citizen for 15 years, proud Canadian now. But there is no Pacific salmon jurisdiction that has the community and the volume of people and passion that we have in British Columbia. And so Tom Rutherford, who's going to come up and speak and facilitate our session here this afternoon, is really the embodiment of a salmon citizen. He worked for DFO for many years as a community advisor, and then when he retired, he could have gone and relaxed, but he started working with the Cowichan tribes and the municipal governments there around creating a collaborative watershed program there that's seeing a lot of positive results for Pacific salmon and the entire watershed. And it's really driven from community and nation up, which is so powerful. So Tom wrote that paper that Stu alluded to, the Made in BC model. And so we're delighted to have Tom Rutherford come up at this point, talk a little bit more about that particular paper that he wrote, and then help facilitate some discussion this afternoon around the Made in BC model. So big round of applause to welcome Tom Rutherford.
Thank you so much, man.
Well, thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I cannot tell you how excited I am about this, right? And what a privilege it is to be here. I'd like to start, as I often do, with a few words in Hulkaminam, which is the indigenous language where I come from. Asiyam nat siya skip aikwana silamnala its kakip atanakwel tun I at masquium slawatu squamish tamach. I squallow no near tsitsoatl ni at a sea ice. So what I'm sharing with you in my halting Hunitum Hulkaminam is that it's a privilege for me to be here on the traditional unceded territory of people who've been stewarding salmon for millennia. And it's a privilege for all of us to be here and acknowledge that. I'm also saying that it's a privilege and it's special that we are here for one purpose. We're here to work together collaboratively for salmon. And it's very, well, this has probably never happened where I'm standing in front of a room of 400 people who are here with a common purpose and a common passion. And it's very special, and I'm just acknowledging that. Before I jump into the presentation, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the PSADS process and what we've got out of it, I'd just like to ground things a little bit. Like, this has been 2 crazy days, 2 wonderful days, 2 days that I'm never gonna forget. But after this, I'm going home. I'm gonna take a ferry, I'm gonna go to Vancouver Island, I'm gonna drive south, and I'm gonna cross the Cowichan River. I'm gonna smell fish. Because we've had 200,000 chum salmon swim up the river in the past 2 weeks. And I'm not a mathematician, but they're 4 or 5 kilos each. That's probably over 1 million kilos of salmon have swum up our 50-kilometer-long river. And if you and I were to take a walk on that river in 8 weeks, we'd be lucky to find a jawbone or an operculum plate. That biomass is sucked into the ecosystem, and as you all know, everything from the benthic invertebrates to the bears benefit from that. And after I cross the Cowichan River, I turn off, and I get on my own dirt road, mountain road, and I'm driving up the road, and I'm gonna drive across a culvert. And that culvert contains a creek that I can jump across in floodwaters without getting wet. It's a jump across creek. It'll be dark, but I'll know that in that creek, there's at least half a dozen coho salmon, right, spawning. And that creek is this big. And if I were to tell that story to someone from away, and if I were to tell them that I live in a river that's 50 kilometers long with like 1 million tons of big fish in it, and I'm driving across a creek this big that's got fish this big in it, and not only that, those fish have been halfway to Japan and have come back home, have come back to where I live. I'm a scuba diver, I can get lost in a swimming pool, right? That's a miracle. And if I told that story to someone from Poughkeepsie, or Portugal, or Puerto Rico, they would think I was crazy or as a liar, or both. And that's what we're working with, and that's what we can't forget, right? That's the miracle of salmon. And that's what all of you work so hard for. And that's what the PSADS process was about. So I just wanted to take a minute to kind of talk about that, right? This isn't all about process. It's not all about science. It's about both, but it's about salmon. So I'm going to try and figure out the technology here. 25 minutes, I'd like to talk to you briefly about the Salmon Action Dialogues. I'd like to talk about how that led me to have many, many conversations with our colleagues south of the border in Washington State, some of whom are here today. And that informed our collective decision-making about how we might be able to do things a little bit differently in BC, like to benefit salmon, and how we could do that. And then at the end, I'm gonna throw out some next steps. And I think, I can't speak for everybody, but what I'd like from this room is this crazy talk? Or is there something here? Is there something here? Because Oh, I'm going backwards. Story of my life, right? Thanks to the PSF and FNFC, there's a series of workshops that brought people like many of you, not as big a group, but a similar group together several times to put our minds to this collectively. Like, because if you think about it, 70% of salmon stocks in BC are in tough shape, right? I've been doing this work for 45 years in one way or another, and I've failed miserably. I feel it, right? Things are much worse off than when I started. We're not everywhere, not all at once. We're failing. We need to do something different. It's going to be hard. So one of the products of that process was this slide, which kind of identifies, you know, what are the levers we can pull? We can change how we harvest. We can change our habitat, improve it, like conserve it, protect it. We can change how we operate our hatcheries. We're all doing that. We're all doing that. And I would suggest like 99% of us are probably doing a pretty good job. The problem is, for the most part, and that's changing, we're doing it in our little bubbles, right? Like we're doing a great job, but we're not doing a great job of working together, right? Traditionally, that's changing and it should change and it has to change faster. But there's no overarching model that's painting how we're gonna do that. So I think the consensus was we need some kind of coordinated, sorry about that, I'm a learner. So yesterday, Murray and Ed showed us this really complicated, you know, diagram of a complicated thing. This is another complicated diagram of a complicated thing, but I like this one better, right? It feels a little more friendly. And there's a few things I'd like to point out. I could talk like about this for a long time, but I'm not going to. But a few of the things that came out of the meetings that generated this schematic are, we need to work together. There's a lot of wisdom in the community, right? That's where the knowledge lies. Like the people who live in the community know it best, know how to look after it, right? They need to be empowered. That there's a real role, having said that, for some kind of overarching provincial guidance and support at a regional level. There's a strong thought that we've got a lot of these things in place. If you've been to some of the workshops and heard some of the work that's going on in the Upper Fraser or in the Nicola or the Watlick Fisheries on the west coast of the island, like we're sort of doing this, but it's grown organically. There's no system, right? There's no system. And then finally, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? We've got a lot of this stuff happening, but we want to make sure we're driving in the same direction. And so the salmon experts came up with some thoughts. First one was, we're not winning the battle here. Like, there's a lot of good work happening, and some places we're doing well, but not everywhere and not enough. The way we work together, the way we deliver salmon programming is not the best way. I would suggest to you, respectfully, for all the work everyone is doing, we've got some kind of major systems failure here, right? We're not jiving. All that good work is not resulting in the benefits that it should be. And that one of the things that came out of the folks at that meeting is we see a need for a system that empowers decision-making and expertise at the watershed level, but that provides coordination and support at a regional level and has some kind of guidance at a provincial level. And I'm going to get into all that stuff, but you don't have to look very far to find a system like that. The Washington State Salmon Recovery Model. And I was asked to speak to people down there. I had 11 really frank conversations with excellent people that were very upfront with me about what was working and what wasn't working. So I'm going to squash 30 hours of conversation into 3 slides. This first slide is really quickly how it works. There's a governor's salmon recovery office in Olympia. There are 4 or 5 state employees there who represent salmon, who are salmon advocates at the state and the federal level, and who coordinate the work across the state and report out. There are 8 regional organizations. You'll see them in the picture, from Upper Columbia all the way down to Puget Sound and the coast. Those organizations do recovery plans, one recovery plan process for each region, not 2 or 3. And they support the work of what they call watershed entities, which I'm going to call watershed organizations. Sorry, lead entities, which I struggle with. And that's where the work happens. That's where projects are selected, projects that fit into a system that everybody knows and understands, right? Those regional recovery plans, I'm going to talk about that. And everyone understands what the priorities are and how that works. So that's the system, quick and dirty. So what are the takeaways? A few things that are different and significant. The Washington State recovery structure was created by law. It's legislated. It's not something that changes when there's an election or changes when the funding runs out. It's the law. That's pretty significant. The work at the state level, I think Eric's here, and he might like to hear this, but the Governor's Salmon Recovery Office, when I asked the folks with their feet in the creek, right, what do you think about those guys up in Olympia, right? Like, is that kind of helpful to you guys? And I was half expecting them to say, well, if that money was here on the ground, we'd do a lot more with it. Without exception, they said, they're our champions. They represent salmon. We need those folks. They're in fact fighting for us, and actually heard in the corridors of power, right? So there's a real function for salmon champions and an overarching role at the provincial level. Another key is those organizations, both regional and at the watershed scale, they have guaranteed core funding, not project funding, but funding to keep the lights on. And when I look out here and I see all of you who work in watershed organizations that write proposals every year, right, to try and keep alive, the value of that, of at least having like a bum in a seat that's guaranteed. You've got a coordinator, right? You don't have to look for money. That is super valuable, and they have that in Washington State. And then finally, even though it's a structure that's mandated by law, flexibility is built in. So if you live in the Upper Columbia, you're not going to have the same system as someone in coastal Washington. If I'm from Haida Gwaii, I'm not going to have the same needs as someone in the Thompson River, right? We've got to have flexibility, but the fact that there's a structure with certainty that's not ephemeral, that's not tied to election cycles, is massive. There's a couple of red flags too. The mandate piece. In Washington State, the state has the mandate to manage salmon. The feds have the mandate to manage species at risk. Most of the populations in Washington are listed. So both levels of senior government have a mandate. Of course, here in Canada, it's different, right? The feds have the salmon mandate, and the province has a mandate for everything that affects salmon. Water, forestry, mining, linear development, residential development. So that's probably a tough kind of formula unless there's a really close relationship. And in Canada, as Stu has very articulately said, the nations, I feel, are going to lead this, right? They have rights and title. They have thousands of years of experience. The watershed where I live in, the reason that we've been able to experience pretty significant success, the reason I can drive over a river with 200,000 salmon in it is because Cowichan Tribes has embraced a leadership role. The community has supported that. We've learned from each other, and it's strong. There's a question of this passing a law. Of a forcing mechanism. So If we want to change, we need some impetus to do that. What I would say is the work that Stu has done, right? That trilateral agreement is massive. When we started doing this, that hadn't been signed, and I didn't say this to Stu. This is my inside voice, was good luck with that. It's done, right? It's done. We can do this, right? We can do things differently. And it would be nice to have legislative tools. I think we need them, but we don't have to wait for them, right? Salmon can't wait. We need to build this thing out. The last thing I'll say is on scoping. In Washington State, with the Bolt decision, right, harvest and hatcheries are, by law, a G2G, or what we would call a G2G decision. So this salmon recovery strategy deals mostly with recovery work, habitat restoration work. And I think that's a good place to start. I think it's a bad place to finish, right? So I think that's an easy place to start, but I think to really turn the salmon picture around here in BC, we need to expand it. If we have people in the field restoring habitat, they can be counting fish. We have guardians that are doing that kind of work now, right? If we're doing that and we have a presence on the ground, we could start looking after habitat, right? We could start addressing some of the issues Bruce was talking about like observance and compliance and follow-up, right? In the Cowichan Valley, our Guardian program, and here's a picture of Wayne Page Jr., one of our guardians, with Stockwe, a giant dancing salmon, which we also have. Those guardians have a mandate by DFO. They're enforcement officers, right? We need that presence on the land. So what's all this mean? If we're serious about this, and we're going to talk about it, right? We'll have a bunch of people up here that are willing to share their thoughts on this. I think we need to do 4 things. We need to work on the governance piece, and that's the hard work Stu is doing, and it is hard work. But unless we can get a situation where the nations, the feds, and the province are working together as equal partners, providing guidance, I don't think we're going to succeed. Having said that, that's going to be work. So while we're doing that, we could build out this model that kind of builds on existing structures that are struggling because they're ephemeral, right? Because the funding comes and goes. There's no permanence. If we can build a framework to hang all the good work that you're doing on that doesn't go away and that's there for you and there for salmon, that would be a huge win. Money, right? We need money, and we've been talking, like we've just spent $100 million a year, right, for 5 years. That's kind of going away. Where are we going to be? This work is worth investing in. It's a good investment. It's not a question of value. What's the value of salmon to BC, right? Yeah, I don't even want to think about it. I mean, we have to do this, right? And commitment. And that's what I speak to. We need some kind of commitment so that every election cycle, every 5-year funding program, we don't see huge shifts. We need a commitment from the nations, from both levels of government, that over the long term, we're serious about salmon. Is that going to be hard? Yes. Is there an option? No. We need to do this. We need to do this. So really, really quickly, what could that look like? What could our model look like? I see watershed scale, and I'm just going to riff on the picture a little bit in that this is a group I work with on the Cook-Sila, where we're doing the province's first water sustainability plan, which is going to take advantage of legal tools that we can change how we manage water and how we manage land. And there's a lot of unknowns there. But I look at that picture, and that's the picture of the future. A process that's being guided by the knowledge of elders, that's being supported by people from different cultures and different backgrounds, bringing different things to the table. There's Indigenous youth involved in a guidance role. Everyone's working really hard at that, and it's a different way of doing business. So at the watershed scale, what we're looking at is recovery plans, right, are developed in the regional scale. So groups like Marine Eds, like Gord Starrett's, right, develop recovery plans. And then at the watershed scale, they could be tweaked. For instance, if Huatlic Fisheries has a Chinook recovery plan, maybe in the Clayoquot Sound, like it needs a bit of shifting, right? That's where the decisions would be made, prioritized by the watershed plans on what work happens, right? What gets funded. And there would be a technical group there that's made up from local subject matter experts from the nations, the agencies, academic institutions that would make those decisions. And there would be a full-time, permanent person to coordinate that, who wouldn't have to look for money. And what would that cost? Not very much money. If we had, 40 to 100 watershed entities, most of you are out there already. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If each one of those organizations got $140,000 a year, it's like 5 to 10 million. It's nothing, right? It's nothing to have that permanent infrastructure to roll out programming. At the regional level, we're looking at where the recovery planning happens. And I just went to a really excellent workshop downstairs before lunch, and to see like Carrie and Ken standing beside each other, right, delivering that. I mean, that is great work, and that's the kind of work that has to happen at the regional scale, but it can't be work that is going away next year, right? We've got to do that work. And I see at that level, at the regional level, the board I work for is not subject matter experts. It's leaders from our community. It's the chief. It's the mayor, it's the chair of the regional district, it's our public health officer. I see at that level, to ground the work in place, it'd be really handy to have like a citizens committee or a board to provide perspective on the technical work. And again, that's where you could have some technical expertise available to all the watershed entities, an engineer, a biologist, hydrologist. So if you had 14 regions, $500,000 would pay for that. Like it's $7 million. It's not a lot of money. So what happens at the top? Well, at the top is where you've got a trilateral partnership between the 3 authority holders who make the decisions on resourcing the regional entities, and that could change. If there's a big bar, that area needs money this year, right? So that's where that kind of high-end decision making would be made. And they would provide oversight or roll up the data. So really quickly, this is not a hierarchical model that we've been gaming on, right? This is a model where at the watershed scale, the work gets done, the communities and the knowledge holders are empowered to make those decisions and do that work, supported by a regional scale that's responsible for the planning piece, right, the recovery planning piece. The reason Washington State works is because they have recovery plans that everyone believes in, right, based on good science, based on indigenous knowledge and teachings, and everyone believes in them. And so it's really easy to prioritize the work. And then at the provincial scale, you'd have the high-end oversight. You would have like empowering of the others. And those would be underpinned by these coordinated restoration plans and core like funding. So nobody wants to look at a table with like numbers on a Wednesday afternoon at the end of a workshop. The only reason I put this up there is to show that it's affordable, right? I mean, PSSI has been spending $100 million a year, doing really good work, and it's going to go away. If we had that amount of money and invested in a system that was permanent, that would allow each watershed organization a couple $1 million, right, to do work every year, right? With a permanent setup that would allow us to hang the good work you are doing in a structure that's not going away. And I'll tell you something. I've been around for 45 years on the delivery end of work, and I haven't thought about this beforehand. I bet you I can name you 10 funding programs that have come and gone in my life. EBAP, Freddie, Son of Freddie, Fisheries Renewal at BC, Urban Salmon Habitat Program, HRCEP, HWI, SESI, ARF, HSI, BC SHRIF, PSSI, there's a dozen, right? Just imagine if there was a system like this set up to receive all that money. So we didn't have to staff up, we didn't have to create a work plan, we didn't have to do any of that stuff. We're like locked and loaded, baby, ready to go, right? In my mind, those resources would be well spent. So where are we going with this? Maybe this is crazy talk, and like that's where the feedback's going to be helpful. But I think that Stu needs to continue that hard work, right? I think that needs to happen. And I think in like many of the speakers here, you know, Marcel and others have kind of talked about how we're really, like the work Murray Ned is doing, like we're getting there, but we have a ways to go. And we need to do that work. If there's any sense to this at all, I think we need to create a team with representatives from the Crown governments and First Nations and the broader salmon community to kind of continue this thought piece, right? Continue thinking about this. The scoping piece is going to be big. My personal feeling is it's going to be easy to start with restoration, right? Because there's no controversy there. But if we have this structure in place, we'd be fools not to utilize it for stock assessment work, habitat protection work, right? We can do this. I think that we need to get advice and guidance from the people that are doing this work already, from the AROM groups, from organizations in Atlic Fisheries, I'm aware of Atligay. Like, there are groups all over the province I don't know about, that I've met and heard about. They're doing this right now. But imagine if we could lock that in. So we need to reach out to those folks and, you know, get their opinion and their help and guidance, right? Or maybe they think it's crazy, but we need to know that. And we need to figure out the geography of this. I think that's going to be really easy, right? Because there are other organizations that have already thought about that. And this recovery planning, I went to this awesome workshop just before lunch, like downstairs, about recovery planning. So, and it's, for someone like me that's not that smart, it's a bit confusing because there are different groups within the same agency or different agency doing different kinds of recovery plans. And one thing that Stu's told me that I really believe in is we need one recovery plan, right, for each region. So you can read this, but I just wanted to recount in closing a conversation I had with my buddy and my boss, member of the Watershed Board, Tim Kochiski, a Cowichan Tribes member, last night. And Tim is one of my Hulkaminum teachers. And he taught me a phrase last night. Natsa alta shech. And what that means, like a lot of Hulkaminum, the literal translation is not what it means, right? Natsa is one, shech is path. So one path. That's not what it means. It means finding the right path, right? It means finding the road we're going to travel on that's going to get us where we want to go, where we need to go, right? It's a lot deeper meaning. It's finding the way. And what I think we need to do to save Pacific salmon is natsa alta shech. We need to find the right way, the right path for us so that we can provide the right path for salmon. And I don't think we're doing that now. I think we're close, but I don't think we're doing it, and I think we need to do it. So with that, as I've been taught, I want to raise my hands to you for all the work you're doing. Thank you for gifting me with your time and attention, right? I really appreciate that, and it's a real honor to have the ability to talk to you about this. So, thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, you got that.
Thank you very much, Tom. And, Tom is one of those people that I just find very grounding. When I sat down and was watching Tom and listening to Tom when he was talking here, I could just feel like I took a deep breath and I just settled. You have that way about you of just settling us, focusing us, and in my heart as I was listening to you, Tom, that privilege, you know, it running around here doing this conference and talking big talk and you know, heady stuff. Man, we're all privileged to be here, and I feel really privileged to be a part of this family and group of people. So thank you, Tom, for reminding us of the privilege piece. So we're gonna move on to having a panel discussion. We're having a little bit of weather challenge. We had slotted to speak our new Provincial Ministry of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship, Randine Neal, who's just starting in her position. And she was having trouble landing coming over from Victoria, but I'm told she has just landed. And so she's going to be coming and wants to speak to the conference, but we'll do that at the end of our session. So at this time, I'm going to present our panelists for the Q&A discussion related to the information that Tom Rutherford just shared. Stu and Tom, you know well for their remarks, so I'm going to invite Stu Barnes and Tom Rutherford to come forward. I'll also ask James Mack to come forward, who's our Assistant Deputy Minister for the BC Ministry of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship. Thank you, James, for being here these last couple days. Also, Sarah Murdoch, who's here with us. Come on up, Sarah, Senior Director of the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And then Brenda Gaertner, if you would please come up. Brenda Gaertner is Senior Counsel, Mandell Pinder, LLP, also a former PSF board member, and extensive experience working with First Nations and Indigenous entities on co-governance models. And then last but not least, my colleague, Jason Hwang, who's our Chief Program Officer at PSF, also retired from Fisheries and Oceans Canada. That's where we get our people, is we steal them from DFO after they're done. And Jason is actually going to be moderating this panel discussion. And the questions that you'll be sending in, please do that through slido.com. So again, that'll come back up there at some moment there. It's Salmon 2024. So, wonderful panel. Jason, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. And we'll just kind of keep the flow going. So we've heard from Stu, we've heard from Tom, and James, maybe if you want to just make a few opening remarks to get us warmed up following those direct talks, and then I'll come to Sarah and then to Brenda.
Great. Well, I guess I know Tom talked about sort of a path for the future. I thought I might just start with a quick summary of the provincial action on salmon over the last while. I'd say, you know, it's fair to say for a period of time, the province largely looked to Canada to lead on salmon. And sometimes if there were problems, we would just sort of blame Canada. And I would say one of the things that happened for us in around 2017, 2018, there was a bit of a rethink and a realization that a lot of the issues that are important to salmon are actually areas where we can make a difference, and that we probably overstepped back and needed to step back in. What was, at a minimum, you know, that's representing the views of communities to Ottawa around the importance of this resource for BC, but also, you know, we do have tools where we can make a real difference. And so that's the first thing that I would start with. The second one is, you know, when we looked at that, to deal with salmon, you've got to deal with that watershed level, the coastal environment, and then that deep ocean international environment. And so some of those areas we can make a direct contribution, and in some areas we can have influence. And so we've tried to break that down and look at a way to do that. I would say, you know, you have to combine with that the journey we've been on with the Declaration Act. And one of the issues that we learned right away was measuring water quality and water quantity was not helping us be a good partner with nations, and actually thinking about watersheds and thinking at a governance level of how we can work together actually opened a conversation for us. And so we've seen that we now have a table with nations where we can talk about watershed issues and where we need to go. We're co-developing policies together, and we're putting funding out there that can do long-term visions, not, to Tom's point, not a 3-year funding profile, but an endowment outside of government, co-developed and soon co-managed with nations that can deliver what currently is small, but forever money, right, to try to get out there and do the long-term work. We've done it as well in the coastal environment. We've worked with nations along the coast and with communities around a coastal marine strategy. And I think Brenda might touch on this, but the icon for us was the work on Great Bear Sea, where Canada and BC and nations came together, established collaborative governance, and funded it in what they call projects for permanence. So you can actually have, budgets are sometimes rich, sometimes weak, but you have for that initiative long-term stable funding to achieve work across generations. And we'd like to see that approach applied more broadly through BC. I do want to say BC SRIF came up a few times. When I started, Fisheries Renewal BC was always like the gold star or the golden era. BC SRIF has now surpassed Fisheries Renewal BC, even if you account for inflation. It's the largest provincial partnered program we've ever done. 250 million in the last 5 years, and I think 140 plus projects. What's interesting is when you talk to people, they don't talk about the money. What they say to us, and I think they're amazed that the province in Canada can put the same money to the same project to make a real difference on the ground. That was the biggest game changer for us in building credibility with people, was that we were actually working for salmon, not delivering on respective priorities. And I think now with the work on the trilateral accord, we've got that missing G, right? We've got a way to work nations to Canada to BC in a framework where we can figure this out. I do want to say one of the exciting parts for us is once you fix watersheds, you fix coastal environment, we have an international issue we've got to tackle. And I just want to say for us, a huge win out of this has been the ability to get our friends in the States up. I know we've been down there talking, and I just can't stress enough, watersheds feel local, but they're also global, right? And I just think the more that we can get future treaty agreements that consider salmon and have nations in the right place in those agreements, it's going to get us in a solutions mindset and out of a, who catches last fish mindset. And I think that's going to be a real imperative for how we work together over the next few years. So, thanks.
Thanks, James. That's a great way to get our panel kicked off. Sarah, why don't I turn to you for some comments from your chair?
Is it already live? Yep. Oh, great. Thanks. Yeah, some hard acts to follow, but I'm pretty excited. And just add maybe a few comments. I'm the Senior Director for the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative, for PSSI at DFO. For those that I haven't met, it's been awesome to see so many familiar faces, though, over the last day and a half. But I guess I did want to say, and I'd be curious for people's reaction after the fact. I remember when I've been with the department for 20 years, the last 15 years working on partnership projects with First Nations and others, but around salmon. And I've really seen a shift, and I hope you guys too with the department, but in our relationships with folks. I remember when we went out almost 10 years ago now to develop an implementation plan for the wild salmon policy. I don't know where Erin Hill is in here, but I saw Misty. But I remember a few folks standing up in those rooms back then going, we don't trust you not to wreck this. That was the message we basically got back, is that we're the first time coming out and engaging with folks in like 10 years. You say you want to support salmon and get into action and move forward, but you don't necessarily have that. We haven't seen that of you lately, and so we're a little nervous of you entering into this space. Anyway, fast forward, did a lot of work through that. We learned a lot launching BC SRIF, as James said. I still hear all the time that the best part about it was they can't believe DFO and BC got together to do this together. But we are 6 years in now, and a lot of good work to show for it. Another big piece that happened, though, since over these last while was the Big Bar landslide response. And I have to say, you know, I think all levels of government are sometimes a little slow to get moving, but the ability of, and I know Gord Starrett and there's some other folks here, the leadership of the local nations, but then our ability of DFO or the federal system basically, and the provincial system to mobilize quickly to address this huge issue for the Fraser River. I think it not only was exciting to be part of that, and I know there's many DFO people who've been on panels over the last few days who were with me up there for different parts of it, leading different pieces of it. You know, that's a career highlight for me, was getting to be part of that, but it's something I took with me in that where there's a crisis, unfortunately, there's often a willingness to try innovative ways, do things differently, and leave egos at the door. And what's nice, though, is, and I know, I think Stu and I and Gord and others have sat on panels like this over the last few years as we came up with the Trilat concept. It was largely taking those lessons learned from BC Sheriff, from the Big Bar response, that we, and as we launched federally the PSSI, it was about how can we make DFO a better partner and lead and be present and lean in, I think to use Tom's words, where it's appropriate, but also to create that space and capacity and core capacity for others. First Nations for sure, particularly, especially, and it was really enheartening to hear some of the rebuilding recovery planning stories this morning. But also other partners like PSF, like all the stewardship groups that are running community stewardship facilities and projects around the province to see. So we've worked, and hopefully people have come out and seen, we're working on being more democratic and transparent with our data. We're working inside the department to try to make some of those systems change to enable this work. But we're also trying to figure out how to work on a couple tracks. One is we want action on the ground. We need to see things, and I think through a lot of the work you are all involved with, we're seeing a lot of action. But I take Tom's words to heart that our efforts across the province, and I know we've got some Whitehorse salmon leaders, or Yukon salmon leaders here as well, giving us examples for what works up there. We need to figure out how to mobilize that and somehow not take away from the fact the best work is done at that local stream level, but also figure out how to transform systemically. And I think that's why we got together on the Trilat Accord at the three governments level, but why I've been a really big champion too for the PSADS process and the action dialogue. So it's pretty exciting where we're at. And with a year and a half left of the PSSI funding and our work with all of you through many of those projects, we're really hoping to use that runway to really line things up so that we're continuing to work at that stream level to support at-risk and stocks of concern, but we're also building that core capacity to work at the scales Tom talked about. So anyway, really interested to hear people's feedback. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. And as I turn the floor over to Brenda, I'll just say the first professional encounter I can remember with Brenda was when I worked for the department and I was a government witness on the Cohen Commission. And I will say Brenda did not go gently on me as a government employee. And I would say, please bring that vocalness to this issue and do not go gently on us in the panel.
All right. I just want to begin gently to be grateful to Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for the hard work we've all been doing together. And I also really want to genuinely express my heartfelt gratitude to all the First Nations people, both from the freshwater and the coastal environments in BC, who have invested time and energy into me just to be able to help and understand a little bit more what it means to be a human being when in relation to the salmon beings. And I hope I bring that into the work, into my comments today. So I was asked to provide a few observations of where we are and where we can go forward. And I'm going to try to shorten them to three key messages. The first one that I want to start with is I really am so grateful to Stu and the FNFC for their hard work and the province and DFO to get that trilateral accord in place. That's a pivotal first step in moving forward. It's the groundwork that needs to be had, and I studied it in preparation for this morning, and in it there's already a commitment to do a joint action plan. Not a joint thinking plan, a joint action plan. And that joint action plan will be critical for building consensus at the local, at the regional, and at the provincial and federal levels by the governments, all levels of government that need to commit to the bigger ideas that we've got here. It's so much easier if we have all levels of government committed to where we're going, not just the idea, but what are we going to do and how fast are we going to do it and what tools are we going to do it in. And those action plans, in my experience over the last 5 years, have been critical for building consensus on that. You committed that First Nations are going to be involved in effective decision making, so we know we can use collaborative governance mechanisms to move that forward. We have fantastic examples already in the province that are tackling much more difficult issues than recovery and habitat. They're tackling management issues, and those are extremely difficult issues. We can build consensus easier on many, not all, but many issues around habitat conservation and restoration and protection. And so I believe that the examples we already have in the province will be a wonderful lifting off point for First Nations Fisheries Council, the province, and BC and Canada. You also committed that new approaches are needed and urgent action is needed. And so what does urgent action mean? What are the timelines that those 3 levels of government are going to give to all of us to do the work? What timelines are we all going to commit to get that action plan done? And what timelines are we going to use to implement that action plan? And the sooner we identify those and commit to those with present governments in place, the better, I would say, because it'll be harder to walk away from it. So get the commitments to when we're going to do the action plans. So how will we get all that work done? You need a team of people who can prioritize implementing so that you can get the joint action plan. If you don't, if people continue to try to have to do all this hard work off the side of their desks, which is happening right now, it'll be too hard to get it done. It'll take longer. So if you can get key people at each level of government, at FNFC, at DFO, and at the province, and I know capacity is hard for all of you. I know having the right people is hard for all of you. I'm not saying this lightly, but I think it's key from what I've observed in terms of what kind of deliveries we've been able to do over the last 5 years. And so my second point is the single action plan for BC salmon. And what are the partnerships and collaborations? Well, we all know we all want to work together. Salmon have made that clear to us that we must do that. It's taken a lot of time for humans to get that. The Indigenous people have been teaching us that for a long time. So what is an action plan? Well, in my view, it's a who, what, when, and how, right? Who's going to do the work? When are they going to do it? And how are they going to do it? And we need to clarify the tools. I know people are getting hooked up right now on what's the forcing mechanism, what are the legal obligations. Definitely we'll want them, but we want the legal obligations and the forcing mechanisms through Indigenous laws and through federal and Canadian laws, provincial and Canadian laws. So we need a little bit of time to think through what those tools are going to be. I don't think we should be rushing to that, but I think we could get that in the next year. We could identify the tools that are going to be available or what we could do. And I think it would be premature to rush it, but I do think we don't have to wait. We also need to have regional recovery plans, and that's a question. How quickly can regional recovery plans be done? They don't all have to be done at the same time. Which ones could be done in 2 years? Which one could be done in 4 years? How many take longer than that? Maybe they can even be done sooner, but if the governments know now what those plans look like, you'll have a lot easier time committing to them. You'll have a lot easier time looking at them. And then last but not least, as my observations, we must clarify the funding opportunities. We must get upfront funding available. There's examples. I'm hoping I'll have time through the question periods to talk about the example on the Great Bear Sea Project for Permanence, where we get upfront money that's put in and managed by Indigenous peoples for the long term. There's structures for doing that. We know how to do that. We put them in place, and we move forward. The last topic that I'm going to touch on is, with Jason's encouragement, is to push a little. And that is, what do we mean by improving habitat? Like, you know, I've listened to knowledge holders and scientists for a long time, but sometimes I think the basics of water and food for salmon gets lost. And we need to make sure that there's enough water for them to swim in through their whole migratory route, and we need to make sure they have food through their whole migratory route. And I don't think that takes anybody's convincing. But how come they're not getting fed in the oceans right now? Well, today I went to a panel that irritated me quite a bit. And that's because, you know, I saw some pretty amazing scientists from this province and from Alaska give incredibly detailed reports that unequivocally show how dramatically industrial-sized hatcheries in Alaska are having. Well, in this model, we need to have somebody who's going to tackle those issues together collaboratively, because there are some things that affect our salmon that are bigger than any one region. They're harder than what everyone is. All of you know this. I know that I'm not telling you anything brand new, but we can't let things like that slip because they're hard questions. We need to have tables that are charged with talking about the most difficult issues. We have good, hard-working Indigenous people all over this province who are going to take on those regional plans, and they're going to do a fabulous job because they know the lands and waters in their territories better than anybody. But who's going to take on these larger scale issues, and how are we going to take them on? And please, let's not forget them. Let's not let habitat protection sit waiting until we figured out habitat conservation. We won't have it. We're losing habitat faster than we're gaining it. And so we have to work on habitat protection. I'm sorry, you asked for me to and I think we can't leave that behind, folks. We have to take that on right from the beginning. And I believe that the right people who are committed to working on this together can talk through solutions and work through solutions even when socioeconomic issues are truly the driving issue. I believe that salmon have a voice at those tables, and we have the skill sets to bring salmon to those tables. And I believe that with the right ideas, we can change the status quo. And we are changing the status quo. And even though I have gray hair, I think it's my duty. I'm not going to leave it for all you young people. I still think it's my duty to work at those tables to figure out how we can have those conversations. And I think all of us need to do that. And the other thing that I think is tricky and hard, but we need to help people like James Mack. Like, how does he make sure that the vision of his ministry gets implemented by the vision of energy, mines, and resources? How do we make sure salmon is part of their discussions? So that when, as I learned yesterday from Professor Moore, so that when mining people want to take the gold out of newly melted glaciers, that's not an option, that salmon is a priority. That's hard. That's going to be extremely hard for James Mack and his team. They might want to fight for that, but they're a small ministry compared to these other ministries, and there's a lot of lobbies there. They're not our enemy, they're our friends. I've worked with James now for 10, 15 years. I completely believe that, but he needs tools, and we need to figure out how to build those tools and work together to do that, and really see that as something we all have to work on. And we can't ask any one region to take on those bigger issues. We must do those together. So those are my 3 major points, and I'll stop there.
You probably want to keep that handy. Well, thanks for getting us going, everybody. And we'll see that we've been having Slido questions building in here. And, well, Brenda, first, I'd like to thank you for not being gentle and for being forthright. And you've been known for that. But you are standing up for what you believe in, for what you've learned to believe in, what you've been taught, like everybody else here on this panel. So it's a great way to turn now to the question part. I'm going to start just by picking the top question from the Slido, and it's talking about comments from the guests here up on stage around how to actually implement this. And I'm going to just reflect that, Tom, you did have a few thoughts in your slide deck, so I won't kind of go and hit those again. But James, I might start with you, and then Brenda, maybe bounce back to you, because you said you had a comment that I think ties to this question from the Great Bear Sea. So James, do you want to offer an opening comment to the first Slido?
Well, one is I'd say we're building it now, right? Like I do want to stress for the province, BC Shrift was a big deal. And I know I appreciate anytime Brenda wants to support me, but I would say we've got a pretty good mandate inside of government. And one of the interesting things is, when budgets come up and come down, I don't imagine the province would pull out a BC Shrift, because every time we spend $1, we're influencing $1.60 in federal money, right? So the leveraging impact's great. And I would just say the trilateral accord is another one. We just know we're not going to hit outcomes unless we've got a government-to-government relationship with nations. BC Shrift had one failing, and it was that it was Canada and BC. We just didn't have the time to figure out that third G. We've now got a framework where we could do that next time. So I think we have those building blocks there. I do think, a great model is the Great Bear Sea, and I mention that because it was a long road. People joined and left. The Marine Planning Partnership was around for 10 years. But the interesting thing with Great Bear Sea was it took a lot of political leadership to get it over the line, and financial commitment. But now it's kind of locked in, right? We are in implementation phase, and things are actually, there's been a lot of groundwork, but things are happening now. So I don't know what exactly a new approach would look like, but we're evolving to it already. So,
Brenda, do you want to pick up on that? Or you go ahead, Sarah, if you're ready to go first.
Well, yeah, maybe first, and then it'll probably lead into Brenda. But I would say one of the things I'm really interested in, I know I've talked to Jason, you about, and Mike, and Stu and Stu's team, is I think we're on the right path with the Trilateral Accord. And I smile, I don't know if you saw, Brenda, I love that you caught the action plan, because to me, that's what makes it real as well. I mean, we got a lot of work to figure out this action plan, but we didn't want to just rest on our laurels with a signature on a nice plaque and accord. So we still got our work cut out for us at that provincial scale. But I'd be really interested. We've got a huge room full of people who work at the watershed and regional scale. And I'm just curious if, and maybe many of you have already talked to Tom about it, but does this resonate? Is this something that, because we will need to continue to, I think, just do that signal check of whether it's working, whether people like this idea. I think there's general understanding around the salmon world that there's different things need to happen at different scales. But I would like to see, while we do have so many people active in this space, see around how do we, and we sessions like today, I keep going back to the recovery planning one. We saw a whole bunch of recovery planning at different levels, and we had another session, what was it called, Lightning Round with BC Shrift. And what I heard coming out of those is wow, we would really like to have more time to talk to each other, compare what's happening in over breakfast, or people were talking about how up in the Yukon they're creating a salmon stewardship center that really echoes what Murray was talking about, the Lower Fraser wanting to do, creating spaces where we can do that sharing between regions and at the watershed scale, just to make sure we have this right. I think that would be, to me, a big important next step, and hold us accountable at the provincial scale to get this action plan done right. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. So, Brenda, if you're ready, I'll turn to you. But in our prep chat, you were talking about the Great Bear Sea, and there were some takeaways from that that you thought might apply to this Made in BC model around funding, around not waiting for the green light necessarily, and doing the work in advance to make it easier for formal authorization or sign off. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but that was kind of the conversation we had, and maybe some of that in light of the question around, so how do we make this actually happen?
Okay, first of all, I just need to clarify, in terms of helping James Mack, it wasn't that helping in your commitment to salmon or the provincial commitment to salmon, it's when salmon competes with mining. It's when salmon competes with agriculture. It's when salmon competes with water flows. That's where we want to help you. We hear the commitment, but the rubber has to hit the road in some of the really difficult places. In terms of a place where I take a lot of inspiration on how, when all three levels of government are working together and are really committed to it, is the completion of the Great Bear Sea Project for Permanence, which you can just Google that if you want to learn a lot about it, Great Bear Sea Project for Permanence. And what that is a trilateral agreement between Canada, British Columbia, and 17 First Nations that go from northern Vancouver Island all the way up to the Alaska border, and they've committed to an implementation of a network of marine protected areas, and they're working at two different scales. They're working at the local scale, where the marine protected areas get implemented, and the nations are moving that along, and then they're working, and the regional scale, and at the network level scale. So there's some comparisons here. There's only 17 nations there, and it was amazing. The other thing is nobody thought that we could do it. Nobody thought the nations could pull this off. And nobody thought we could get it done before elections were gonna happen and threaten the commitments. And we did all of that, and we got it done. And that's because there was a lot of capacity that kept getting built within the Indigenous communities to take the lead. But also there were very committed people at the province and at DFO that wanted to work together. All three are necessary. You got to get the right people at the table who want to make this happen. And you have to have the political pressure behind that to do that. The nations raised $350 million that is now going to be invested. That's federal, provincial, and philanthropic dollars, 280 and 75, if I've got my numbers right. Around that, you can check that. But that's all being invested up front, and the nations invest that over time, and there's agreements that provide all of that to secure the monies in place for the next 20 to 30 years for them to do things. There is work. That's not all the money that's necessary. We can use the same model here. We don't need all the money, but we need a substantive amount of the money ahead of time to be invested and put in so that it's not subject to budget requirements and allocations over time. But there is a model. Those are legally binding agreements now that all levels of government committed to. And so that is now being implemented. The hard work is ahead. There's not everything. Those agreements were hard to do, but that's the easy part. The hard work is actually implementing it and getting it done, but we now have a commitment to do it. And I think it's a very, very useful model for the level of work we're trying to do here. And I think that's why I pushed on the action plan. They had a framework agreement much similar to what your trilateral accord is, to start once the Trudeau government came in, when the Liberal government came in, we got the framework agreement in place. Then the province came to that agreement, so it was trilateral. Then they did a network action plan. And that's why I'm pressing on the single action plan for BC salmon. I truly believe that built the rubber on the road commitments that you need from the governments who are going to put the money behind it, and the philanthropic organizations. Those organizations are not going to just put money behind something that's an idea. They need specifics on when we're going to produce things and how and where in order for that money to be present. And so really I encourage us, I don't say this to you, I encourage us to use the action plan as a mechanism for getting very specific on the who, what, when, and how. And I encourage us to think big on the funding that will be available if we commit the people to do it, because I think it's possible.
Well, Brenda, I am heartened by that kind of message. Like, what I hear you saying is, it's possible, it's going to be hard, but so what? Right? We have to do it. And that's how I heard your message, and I love that, and I think it aligns with what we've been hearing from the panel. Stu, I'm going to put this next one to you, and I'm going to interpret a little bit the questions on the Slido through the lens of an old guy. I've been here before. I've seen good ideas. I want to believe it's going to be better. Your organization did something I haven't seen before. You were part of a trilateral accord for something with the federal crown and the provincial crown. Do you think there's a chance that it can be different this time? Or is this going to be, made in BC model on a dusty shelf with a whole bunch of other things?
I just wanted to list a couple of key factors in my mind that would be lead to a higher rate of success for an implementation plan. So one being that over the last couple of days, and in this role, I get the privilege of being able to listen to and learn about a lot of the projects. Of course, over the last couple of days, we did the same thing, and most, if not all, the efforts being made are First Nations led or partnered. All these projects or plans that I've listened to have the thought about and included ways to include non-native values. So I think it's key that we understand that just because First Nations are now finding their rightful places in seats, that does not mean that now non-native voices are going to be shut out. We know how it feels to be left out, and we have never, ever wanted to replicate that experience to another culture or race. And so I think that's a key point in terms of getting some, change is a vulnerable feeling. And so I know as we get into a changed environment, the systems change, transformation conversation, or that implementation jump off, those sense of securities need to be in place in terms of where does my voice now fit in? Do the natives now get a veto power? No, that's not at all what we were thinking of. It's clear that we can't do this alone. Our communities have expressed over and over that we are tapped. We're stretched so thin within our communities for capacity to deal with the plethora of issues that we all face, not just First Nations communities. And so working together on the management and fish recovery is almost not the only option forward for us. So I want to make sure that the crowd knows, especially a crowd like this, knows that as First Nations take their rightful place in the seats, we know how we want it to be engaged. So we're going to take those knowledge lessons into the conversation as we become co-deliverers, co-managers, all that, co-scientists, right? Yeah, and then in terms of the implementation, I see, and I'm getting ahead of you there. But how do we see this with a changing political environment? I see potentially a spot for PSSI to land that's outside of government realms, and maybe that in itself is enough to convince government that there needs to be a PSSI 2 that can be rolled out in a different way, shape, or form. And maybe that's the only chance that PSSI 2 has to exist, is by showing that we can do this in a different way. So that's my answer to the other question that I seen come up on the board. And then I also just wanted to say, for the implementation piece again, sorry I'm going back and forth. It's my first time on a panel. I'm kind of getting uncomfortable in the suit.
That was inappropriate.
So as I get texts from my brothers and sisters that are in the fish world, what's this trilateral accord about? I need to know more about it, right? So my response has been, by signing the accord, really what we've done is bought a shiny new boat, and it's on the dock now. And so the hard work in front of me is to make sure that all First Nations, as much First Nations as possible, get on that boat before the boat dries up on the dock. So that's going to be a big piece of the implementation as well. So I'll leave it there. I'm kind of getting all over here.
Well, thanks, Stu. That's awesome. I've been asked to be able to wind us down at 3:20, right? We got 5 minutes? Okay. So, well, Tom, there's one that's been floating near the top here, and I thought I might start it with you. And it's the use Band-Aids with one hand and cut up watersheds with the other. And how can a model like the one that you presented potentially influence the Crown's prioritization of industrial development and economic growth and push towards fish first? And so I'd give you maybe a first run at that. And James, as the guy with the big provincial hat, maybe see if you want to do a follow-up after Tom comments on this.
Sure. So I'm glad you left the easy one for me, Jason. It's great. So a couple things, right?
There's no easy ones.
Great question. I've got two thoughts. One is if we can create a model that empowers effective community collaborative groups on the ground, where you've got people working together effectively on the ground in communities, then I still believe that the big changes happen at the watershed scale. And the big changes with respect to prioritizing how we utilize our land and our water and our fish, that the people who know each other, and if we have that capacity at the watershed scale, then that's going to be one way of effectively engaging those issues that we don't really do now. Like most of that, and even the question is like how can someone fix that, right? Who's gonna fix that? You're gonna fix it, right? I mean, I really believe in that. But the other thing is, like, I'm old enough to think that what I'm experiencing today is like some kind of small miracle, right? Where I'm in front of a room full of people with leaders that represent First Nations interests and the feds in the province agreeing on significant change. And to be honest, I've never seen that. I've never seen it. And so that's the power, and that's the kind of strength that is going to be able to tackle these big issues we've never been able to. None of this stuff, Jason and I were talking before kind of lunchtime. None of this stuff is gonna be easy, right? It's all gonna be really hard. But that's okay, right? That's okay, right? We need to do it, right? There were some very interesting conversations yesterday with representatives from Okanagan Nation Alliance and others, right? Talking about really doing the hard stuff, right? And we have examples of that on the land now. And so I really think we can build on that. And I think if we can give examples at the watershed scale of tackling those issues, then it's going to give everybody else a bit of a poke too, right, at the higher scale. And I have confidence that, and maybe it's naive, you know, but I don't think so. I really have confidence that if nations are in a position of influence, that we'll see different outcomes. That's been my life experience. And I have some confidence in that.
Well, thanks, Tom. James, did you want to offer a perspective on that, since it was kind of touching on at least some degree of provincial jurisdiction?
Well, first off, it's the right problem, right? So that's probably the biggest challenge right now is we've got a portfolio of successful projects that show like people engaged, jobs getting created, positive results, but then decisions happen over there that whittle down your wins, right? So it's the right question. I'd kind of say two things. One is just about the fish first. One is, one of the values in my new job is we mash together a bunch of stuff and we fund projects for drought resilience, flood resilience, healthy drinking water, healthy watershed, salmon. And most times, if you look through the list, well over half of them could have been funded under any other initiative. So one I would add is, like, salmon are actually a great value set for policy because when things work for them, it brings a lot of other things to the table. And I think whether it's food security or drinking water, so I would just caution against being salmon above all other else, because it might put you in a false conflict when actually a lot of the things that different people want to achieve end up in the same place. But I would add that we do make decisions because of economic goals that impact salmon. We do it all the time. And, you know, I think we also want to achieve economic objectives. And sometimes nations, they struggle with the same choices that the province does. And they make decisions that will lean one way or another because that's their best decision to make. I think we have to respect that. The trick is in the collaboration, right? Where we lose is when those values aren't at the table. And I think we found that salmon is one that can really drive that. It is what I'd call a kitchen table issue for a lot of people, is that access to salmon. And so I think the more we get in the room, you know, not as a we must win every fight, but if you're in the room, the trend line on the values goes in the favor of salmon. So.
Thanks, James. All of these things, I think I'd love to discuss more deeply. I would like to get to the one at the top of the list here. And Stu, you touched on youth and your appreciation and admiration for the youth in the room and your hope when you spoke to seeing the youth in the room, both in the Tier 1 day and then in this workshop. Do you want to just given the time we have, just a short comment on that question? I know it's a big question, but maybe a few thoughts from your leadership desk.
Yeah, for sure. We throw them into the fires and the deep ends. That's exactly how I came to be, basically. We bring them to these conferences, we bring them into meeting rooms, we give them, you know, I have 2 kids myself, and I find myself, you know, looking to protect them and do way more than my parents ever did to make sure that they're not getting into trouble or hurting themselves at all. But I think there's a real value in terms of putting them in vulnerable positions before they're ready even. So, you know, even me on the stage, right? I mean, this is all new to me, but until you do it, until you jump into that deep end and learn to scramble for your life, or jump into the hot fire and learn, oh God, that's too hot, I got to get out of here. You learn to deal with those situations. So we have a lot of people, a lot of youth here over these last 2 days that are just waiting to be tapped on the shoulder to say, hey, that's you now. You get to go to that meeting. And one word of advice that I got when I was getting thrown into all the fires was, you don't say anything for a whole year. You use your listening skills, and then you find your voice. And then that's the traditional teaching that I took into all those events. But yeah, you've got to just take that leap of faith with them and get them into our world.
All right. Well, thanks, Stu. Yeah, thank you. That's a nice way to maybe wrap this up. So unfortunately, I think we're at time. I'm kind of getting a signal from our team, and this is a conversation I think we could have for a long time. But I think as a takeaway to kind of sum up this segment, an idea has been put forward for this room and other rooms to consider. And we hope that you will think about it. We hope you will talk amongst the people you work with, amongst your communities, and that you will think about this idea. And is it crazy talk? Is it something that can happen? If it isn't this, what is it? Because I haven't spoken with anyone who says, oh yeah, it's all working for me, right? This is good, just keep doing this. So we need to do something else, and if not this, what? And I would sort of leave that as a takeaway, and I'd like to thank everybody who's been on the panel today for this wonderful afternoon. I've enjoyed spending time with you, and so a round of applause, please, for our panel.
Yes, thank you all very much. Okay, I'll go this way. I'd like to just take an opportunity as well to answer the youth question that was supported by so many people weighing in there, and thank you for that. You raising that point and reiterating it as you did respectfully is appreciated, and that's why we wanted to have this session with you. And I will be the first to admit, I think that's been an oversight in what we've been thinking about in terms of this Made in BC model. I don't think anybody in Washington State, they don't have a youth seat, and that's not something that's come up, I think, Tom. So I say thank you for bringing this up to our attention. So that would be one thing, is now we can take that forward and integrate that into this process that we're working on with FNFC's leadership on the Trilateral Accord. The other point I would make is this is the first time we've ever done a conference like this. And we would like more of you to get involved with helping us do the next conference. And so I will commit to you right now that we will have a planning committee process, and that we will have a youth seats. If anybody wants to get involved, come see me after this, because that's the only way I think we're going to ensure that less gray hair guys like me. I'm glad to have someone else MC this next time that's a youth. I mean it. So that's the way we'll do this, right? Is as Stu said, you step forward and you make that comment like that and make us answer it, which we thank you for, and now it's our job together to act on it. And so I think, Stu, I can speak for both of us in saying, and going forward, we will be more attentive to that, certainly from PSF's perspective. So I'd just like to ask your forbearance, if I can. I know we're supposed to end here in just a few minutes, but we have a speaker who I think is really important for us to hear from. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Minister Neal was trying to get over earlier to speak, but due to the weather, couldn't get over, but she did get over. And so I want to provide a few minutes here for Minister Neal to come up, and it's so important. James Mack, you've been doing a great job speaking for the province and all your work over the years. But now we have a new minister. She's the Minister of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship, Walrus. You'll get used to that, Minister. We call it Walrus. You don't have to do a Walrus impersonation, though. But Minister Neal is a brand new elected representative from the Sunshine Coast, West Vancouver region. She's very, very connected to the outdoors. I know this from friends who know her. She's a former journalist and reporter, community-focused reporter in particular, and I think she really wants to get to know all of us. 2 hours after she was sworn in as a minister of the cabinet, she phoned me at PSF just to introduce herself and let her know that she valued the relationship with the Pacific Salmon Foundation and cared about salmon. So please stick with us and join me in welcoming our new Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship Minister, Minister Randy Neal. It's nice to meet you on stage.
Oh man, new minister, get fogged in, circling Vancouver, and then finally I hear the pilot say, put your seatbelt, and I'm like, we're landing, and we landed in Richmond. So I just got here from there, so I really do appreciate it, and I'll keep this really, really short. And thank you so much, Mike, for the introduction. It is an absolute pleasure for me to be speaking here today on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. My name is Randy Neal. I am the new Minister of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship, Walrus. Everybody loves a good walrus, so it's a great name. Better than Land, Water, and Resource Stewardship, which was the original name and led to some people calling the ministry Land Wars, so this one is much better. Over the past few weeks since I was sworn in as minister, I've spent virtually every waking minute getting up to speed on what this ministry does. It's a lot. There has been a lot of briefings. My briefings book cost me $32 every time I take it on the plane to go home because of the weight of it. But first and foremost, I do want to say one thing I know for certain is that I work with an incredible team. James has been amazing. Lori Halls is the deputy minister, and all the other ADMs are talented, passionate, committed people. And the other thing I've learned is that wild salmon recovery and resilience is a key priority for Walrus. We are committed to continue working with our partners to restore healthy and abundant wild salmon populations, and we know that this is incredibly important for everybody who lives in this province. My predecessors in this ministry, Nathan Cullen and Josie Osborne, did great work building a strong foundation for the ministry, and it's an honor for me to continue that work that they started. I'm excited to collaborate with groups and with all of you in the room, groups like the Pacific Salmon Foundation, First Nations Fisheries Council, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and everyone else here to continue to protect and restore wild salmon and supporting the people and the communities they're all connected to. And that's the other thing I learned is that we're all interconnected. I'm thrilled that the Premier asked me to lead this ministry. As Mike suggested, the priorities of this ministry are mine, first and foremost. The last word in the ministry is stewardship, and that is a fundamental change in the way a lot of ministries work. We are here in this ministry to steward our water, land, and resources, and that means to take care of it for 7 generations into the future, and it's an honor to be a part of that. My husband is a biologist. My daughter is a biologist. She works for the Haida in Haida Gwaii. Fish and salmon and the science behind it are incredibly important for our family. I did so many stories with the Pacific Salmon Foundation when I was a reporter, and prior to running for office, I was working for the BC Parks Foundation and the 30 by 30 commitment, and the salmon and protection of salmon was a huge part of that as well. So healthy salmon benefits all of us. The species, of course, is integral to the social, economic, and cultural fabric of this province for each and every one of us. And building a strong, resilient future for BC requires shared approaches to stewarding our land, water, and communities that depend on our healthy ecosystem. And this past summer on National Indigenous Peoples Day, alongside the Government of Canada and the First Nations Fisheries Council, we signed a trilateral accord to urgently address the decline of wild Pacific salmon. This represents a transformative step that will help us develop long-term comprehensive strategies and share resources to address the decline of wild Pacific salmon in a coordinated way. Our shared interests and priorities are going to be key to making this a success. This summer, we also introduced BC's first ever coastal marine strategy that integrates a salmon lens within its policies and vision. And that lens will provide a framework for the sustainable use of our ocean resources and a system that seeks to create opportunities for coastal communities while advancing reconciliation and conservation objectives with First Nations. Going back to 2019, we launched the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, or BC SRIF, the province's largest investment in salmon recovery alongside our partners at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And together with DFO, we contributed almost $143 million to the fund. And then again, in 2022, we committed an additional $142 million with DFO to ensure this work was continued. And there have now been nearly 100 completed projects that are already showing results. Those projects are mitigating the impacts of climate change on salmon, protecting and restoring priority salmon populations, and supporting sustainable fishing practices and promoting Indigenous leadership and traditional knowledge. There is such a strong demand to continue this work, as seen by the more than 350 applications we've received for Phase 2 of BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund. To protect wild salmon, we also must protect watersheds. Watersheds connect the land, the freshwater, the ocean, and communities. They have important cultural, spiritual, and recreational value for First Nations and communities across this province. They also help us mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change because they can help prevent the impacts of drought, flood, and wildfires. And our government has undertaken several actions to protect watersheds and communities across BC. In 2020, we provided $27 million to support the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, led by the Real Estate Foundation of BC, launching 61 projects at more than 200 places and creating more than 700 jobs in the process. In Budget 2022, the province invested another $30 million to build natural protection against climate impacts, strengthen ecosystems, and secure good, quality, safe drinking water. In March 2023, our government announced a $100 million investment towards the establishment of a permanent watershed security fund to support work needed to improve outcomes for watersheds all across the province. Critically important work. And we continue to work on co-developing our watershed security strategy with First Nations, ensuring our work is coordinated with other priorities such as safe drinking water, food security, and clean electricity. So, to wrap up, we are all here today because we share the common goal of protecting and restoring our province's wild salmon and their habitats, and we know this work can only be successful if we do it together. We have a responsibility to steward and protect BC's wild salmon and natural resources, and at the same time, ensure that the people who live in this province are supported by a sustainable economy. It's incredibly inspiring to see what we can achieve when we work together and we work collaboratively and we work toward a common vision. And I find that we will always have more commonalities than differences when we take the time to really sit down, listen to each other, build relationships, and work together. So thank you again for inviting me to kick off this conference today. I apologize you stuck around till the end, and I look forward to working with all of you many, many times again in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister. Nice to meet you. Just the beginning. Thank you, Minister Neil, very much for coming, and that's a great way to help us wrap up our conference. I got a whole bunch of things I was going to say, but I'm going to make it brief. I'd like to just sum up in my heart the one word that I'm feeling from the last 2 days, and it's inspired. And inspired by relationships that have been built, inspired by science and data and traditional knowledge that has been shared, inspired by people's openness to build new relationships when we're all so busy, and inspired to find new paths forward. You know, I'm just filled with a lot of gratitude as well to each of you for coming here and being a part of this conference. As I mentioned to you, we plan to do this conference on a regular basis every other year. And I think what we've learned from seeing the Slido questions and the responses that we've got from you the last couple days is there's opportunity for us to keep this type of dialogue happening. So we'll put our heads together with Stu and FNFC, but you know, I think we'll look for other virtual opportunities, for example, in between now and the next one to get together and keep this conversation going. So a couple of housekeeping items before we say farewell. We are going to try to recycle these lanyards, so if you can return the lanyards as you leave. We also will have a survey that will come out to you in the email after the conference. We really need you to fill that survey out. I'm already sensing things we can do better, do differently next time, but we want to hear that from you. And Christina, do I have any other things I'm supposed to say? No. And I also have a big, long list of people to name and thank, but my event director said, don't do it. Because you always, or VP development said, don't do it, Allie, this is your fault. So I'm not naming all the names of the people who helped make this happen for the fear that I might forget someone and hurt their feelings. But the people that put a lot of energy into this at FNFC, at PSF, at DFO, at the province, and others, you know who you are. I'll be thanking you with a dinner or something. But thank you, and if I could just ask for a round of applause for all the people that helped make this happen. I got nothing left. Thank you, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.